Right now, I want to introduce a guy that's joining us. I told you about it in the beginning of the show. He's done some great stuff with boxing, even though I think his real business is in the music business. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, Carl Weingarten joins us. What's up, my man?
Hey, how are you doing?
I really appreciate you taking the time
Hey, thank you.
to join us. First and foremost, your main gig is the music business, right?
Yeah, that's primarily what creative work I've been doing for like several decades. I'm a guitarist and a composer, and been producing music, instrumental music for my own record label.
Well, that's
But
cool.
along the way, I had other interests. Been a fight fan since I was a teenager, and collecting films. At first, kind of casually, and then over a period of time, got more and more interested. And when I started producing music videos, I got interested in, again in my own collection, and working with some of the boxing films I'd collected. And so and I also went to film school when I was young, so I had all these skills and not much no place to utilize them, to really take advantage of them, until digital video came along. And then I got some equipment so I could do digital film to video transfers. And so I began working more with the boxing films. And so my music and the filmmaking have kind of gone hand in hand since then.
Well, that's pretty cool that you started working with boxing. Obviously, that's what we do. And what turned me on to you was I saw the Jack Johnson, Tommy Burns project you worked on, and from what I understand, and I'll be honest with you, the only footage I never saw the end of what you were able to tie in. You know, usually the fight ended with Tommy Burns knocked out. But tell us about that and how you obtained that and put it all together, digitized. I know for a fact that takes a really long time to do.
Yeah, I mean, I had a copy of the film for a number of years. I'd seen it, many years ago, and it was first published by Big Fights Incorporated. Jim Jacobs claims to have found the film, and his company with Bill Caton released a 12-minute version of that in the middle 60s. They did also produced a couple of documentaries which included Jack Johnson, and they included footage of the Johnson Burns film in that. But they cut the film in such a way to make it appear that they had all the footage. And the truth is that Jim Jacobs had only acquired one reel of film. He says it was from a collector in Australia, and perhaps that's true, but he says he only has one reel of film, and it's the middle rounds. It's not the beginning or the end of the fight. But because they needed to have a release of it, they needed to market the film and make money from it, and for television, they re-edited the footage and relabeled the footage, relabeled the rounds to make it appear that you were looking at a highlight of the whole thing. And because they didn't have the end of the fight on film, they created this scenario in the film where there's a freeze frame, and they claimed that the police interrupted the fight and that they stopped the cameras, and that's the last frame that exists. Coincidentally, what looks like Tommy doing kind of a nosedive after Johnson was trying to knock him out. And they said, well, this is where the camera stopped, and then the fight ended, and that was it. That's not what happened, but they just wanted to market the film. A partial version of the film wasn't marketable for them. I mean, just showing a portion of it. They had to make it seem like they had the whole thing. Anyway, so over the years, there were newspaper reports and rumors from people, collectors, people that, boxing historians said, it doesn't exactly jive with accounts from the time. And if you look at the newspaper accounts, it seemed a little fishy, his story versus the eyewitnesses. And then more telling was that in 1908, early 1909, a production of the fight movie was released to the public, Australia and the US and Europe. And there are reviews that you could go back and look at of people that went and looked at the film and reviewed it like you'd review any film, any movie that's shown in theaters. And they said quite clearly that it went 14 rounds. Tommy was in big trouble. He'd been knocked down in the beginning of the 14th, and Johnson was all over him. And the police who were there, at the time, the police were there just to make sure nobody got killed or no fighters were seriously injured, because referees that in that time were not stopping fights. They were not protecting fighters in that way. So the police who had been there signaled from ringside and said, stop. And then the referee yelled to Jack Johnson to stop punching, and he did. And the police stepped into the ring to make it official. The referee, who's also the promoter of the fight, said, well, Johnson was ahead on points. So at this point, the bout is being stopped and Johnson's the winner. And Johnson walked to his corner. Apparently, it was being celebrated. Tommy Burns walked to his corner, and that was it. So
you took that fight and you colorized it and everything. Tell us about that.
Oh, actually, I didn't colorize it, maybe, but there are versions online of people have taken that footage and colorized it. What I did is
your piece wasn't colorized. It was just you just put it all together.
Yeah, the documentary includes color photos or duotone photos, but the fight footage itself is not colorized.
Oh no! I knew that the fight wasn't color, but anyway, go ahead. I didn't mean.
No, I have a 16 millimeter copy print from the Big Fights Incorporated on 16 millimeter. It's the same kind of print they sent around to television between the 60s and 70s. And I had it laser scanned at high resolution. So I was able to go into a digital editor and look very closely at the fighters and zoom in closer on the action. And I saw that there was a lot going on that hadn't been discussed in reviews and in narratives of the fight, things that they were doing. Some amazing stuff Johnson was doing in the ring, and the fact that Tommy just kept coming back for more. He just was not quitting, even though he was being overwhelmed. And but the key part is this issue with the freeze frame. As it turns out, Jim Jacobs acquired the film, he claims, in the late 50s, early 60s, and it was kind of big news at the time. And he got a spot on CBS. There was a segment of, I think, Sports Spectacular or one other program where he was being interviewed, and he showed footage that he had, just general footage of the fight to demonstrate that he had this film now, and it hadn't been seen, for decades. Well, within that footage, he was showing a number of different clips. It includes the sequence that he claimed was in the 14th round, and which included the particular freeze frame that they used later on. And the footage continues. An archivist, collector friend of mine had the segment. He said, oh, by the way, it includes stuff that goes on after the freeze frame. So we worked out a trade, an arrangement, and I was able to acquire not a great quality of the segment, and went into the digital editor. I began cutting into the film, seeing that Jacobs and his team had actually spliced up the footage that they had and relabeled rounds. And it was sort of a big jigsaw puzzle to put together. So I began sort of reassembling it as best I could tell from newspaper descriptions. And I found the segment where Johnson is overwhelming Burns, and I inserted this footage, this continued footage at that moment of the freeze frame and after, and lo and behold, it was like a big piece of the puzzle coming together. The fight continued. Tommy was not knocked down at that moment. He was off balance. He regained his balance and almost immediately throws a big overhand right to Johnson, coming back. So after that big flurry that was supposedly, according to a lot of the narratives, that Tommy was about to be knocked out, he was in trouble, but he came right back. So this wasn't the 14th round. This was actually the 7th round.
Let me ask you a question. So there were multiple copies of this film. Like, were these copies of an original? I always thought that part of big fights, they were original films. I knew Steve Lott. I don't know if you ever had.
I knew Steve. Steve was a great guy.
Yeah. Steve gave us. He was the last guy with
yes
fights. He had given us the rights to rebroadcast a couple of things that he had.
He was
in
very
his
generous.
So is that was it the same video that they cut and spliced themselves, and then someone else ended up with those pieces, or were there multiple copies of that? That's the question.
Well, as far as we can tell, there's only a single reel that has been found of that fight. That is to say, a single 35 millimeter theatrical print. The originals are, I'm sure, long gone. So all that we know of is the single reel that Jacobs claimed he obtained from a collector in Australia. There may have been a few copies made of that print given to people like the archives in Australia, a couple other people possibly. But he took that one reel, rounds 6 through 10, and they recut it and relabeled different segments as rounds 1, 5, I think it's 8, 11, and 14, which are really variations of rounds 6 through 9, cut to a different order. So he had that, and he and Caton created this 12-minute version of the film that was distributed to television and has subsequently also been used in a number of documentaries. They literally take his rendition of that and have placed it in other documentaries that have sort of carried on this myth. It was nobody's fault. They didn't know. For a long time, everybody took that what Jacob said was gospel. And it wasn't. They made up a story just because they needed to market this film, not because he wanted to change history or do anything nefarious. They had a business and they were trying to make money with these films. That's what they were in business for. And I should also say that they have to be thanked for all the work they did for decades, seeking out all of these films, which would be long gone at this point, especially anything prior to Jack Dempsey. Most of that footage, we have to thank them for recovering and bringing it into their archive. So they did a tremendous, tremendous service to those of us in the boxing community and those of us who love boxing history.
No, I agree with you 100%. You got some, speaking of Dempsey, you have some stuff on Dempsey too, right?
Yeah, I did a piece on 2 pieces with Jack Dempsey. One of the second Tony Dempsey fight, the long count fight. And it focused mainly on the audio that the fight was broadcast over the air, but the surviving films, most of the presentations you see of the film are silent. Well, a company in the Midwest a record label set up a recording machine and recorded on 10 vinyl discs the 10 rounds of the fight over the air, literally sticking a mic in front of a radio. But those recordings have been long since were forgotten. Archivists had them, but never utilized them. I never saw anybody attempt to synchronize the audio and the video. So I thought this is something that would be a lot of fun to do. The guy who called the fight, McNamara, he was like a pioneer in the business of sports radio calls. So I went into that 7th round and married his audio call live with the silent film, just to give viewers just a sense of the excitement, and bring to life a little bit more that particular round and the long count and that moment and what was going on. That was one film. The other was a close look at the Dempsey Firpo fight. And going in, I did high-res scans of that film, and I wanted just moment by moment go through that. Dempsey was actually down 3 times. A lot has been written about that fight, a lot of myth making about the fight. I wanted to just take a deep dive into that film and say, this is what the film shows. This is maybe not what the myth says, but the film shows things like when Dempsey was knocked out of the ring, he wasn't out of the ring till 9 and just barely made it back in. He was back in the ring in less than 5 seconds. His feet, the lower part of his legs never came off the apron. He was still partially on the apron, and then scrambled back into the ring. The punch that Firpo knocked him out of the ring, if you slow it down and look closely, it's a half punch and a half shove. I don't know if he was just punching that Dempsey would have fallen out of there, but it's just sort of interesting. It was an incredibly wild fight, back and forth. Dempsey down 3 times, once at the beginning of the fight, once in the middle of the first round, and then, of course, being out of the ring. Firpo was down a number of times, but he got up and came back fiercely every single time. It was a very, very exciting fight, and I thought people would enjoy seeing to put the whole thing into slow motion and bring it a little bit closer, take a closer look at it. And there's just more to learn when you're doing that. And it's a lot of fun, especially for boxing tweakers like myself who enjoy that stuff.
Well, I tell you something, Carl. I love that you have that interest, and we certainly need it. One of my things that I'm constantly saying is that boxing's that sport that I believe fans need to know about the history. It's a little different. I mean, every sport has its history, but boxing, the price these guys paid was so high. I just feel that, boxing fans owe it to the sport to learn a little about that. And I'm always trying to push the younger fans into, watching, or even, should I say it, pick up a book and read, on certain things, but I'm so glad that you're doing this. How can people watch your stuff?
My YouTube page is called Fight Films Guy. I just... I could have thought of a better
Films
name.
Guy on YouTube.
At Fight Films Guy YouTube.
Yeah, and you got a bunch of stuff up there.
Yeah, I have a number of films. I've been doing this for a few years now, and I have a number of the films up there from all of them from my collection, where I've scanned them and maybe done a little bit of cleanup on them, and made a good presentation of them. Some of them are complete fights, some of them are highlights. But I started doing these documentaries a couple of years ago, and that's where I'm focused on now. I think it's fun. I think people seem to enjoy those. I think it's more informative. And like you said, a lot of the younger fans, they're not really interested in the earlier eras. I mean, even predating like the 80s or 70s. And I understand. I mean, when I was that age, I was there. I was all about the 70s and 80s fighters, but the more I learned about the older fighters and the old fights, the more interested I was, the more it brought interest to the current fighters. You see the journey of styles.
Yes.
You see the changes, the changes in the rules, the changes in what they could get away with in the ring,
100%.
The conditioning, the pace of the fights. At its most, those fights back at the turn of the century were, when they were at their fiercest, they were no less devastating. They were no less brawls than anything you would see today. And in fact, they were talking about 4-ounce gloves, not 8 or 10 ounce.
Believe me.
And I'm not saying that the one is better than the other or anything like that. It's just different. And those differences are interesting themselves.
It was amazing. Dempsey was one of my favorite fighters. So, it's interesting even more. I happen to have written a book about a freed slave. His name was Tom Molyneux.
Yeah.
And, that's, 100 years before. And it was, people look at the Dempsey time, even the Jack Johnson times, and they look at that as rough and tumble. Well, you go back to bare knuckle. It's even worse. I got a guy. Now I'm going to forewarn you because he always comes up with these questions.
Okay.
They don't make any sense to me, but every time he asks the question, the person that I'm asking the question to, it means something to. Okay. This is from my man, Coach. He says, ask Carl if you could go back to Camp Sherwood Forest with modern digital restoration, is there a specific film you made that you'd want to fix or score with your slide guitar? And he's asking Great Escape.
Okay. I actually did put some of my own music in this latest documentary. I play slide guitar, play acoustic, bottleneck, as well as electric styles as well. I'm still trying to work that out. Trying to think of a film, any film. I would love to work with Ken Burns and do some music for him. I would enjoy
Coach.
that.
Coach always asks these. We had a guest on. He asked a question. The guy called me the next morning. He's like, "Who is this guy? Only so and so. No, only so many people know this." Blah blah blah. I said, "Calm down." But anyway, Carl, I really appreciate you taking the time. And,
my pleasure.
At Fight Films Guy, right?
Yes.
At Fight Films Guy on YouTube. Of course, I checked it out. It's great stuff, and you guys should check it out too. Carl, if you ever want to come back on again, just let me know. I'd love to have you.
My pleasure. I would love to do that.
All right, my man. Stay in touch.
Okay, you take care.
All right. That's Carl Weingarten. Check out his site or check out his YouTube page. He's got some stuff on Johnson and Ketchel, which I was going to talk to him about too, but we just got I found too many questions to ask him during the time. He's also got a pretty good Rocky Marciano thing. He's got multiple parts. I think there's 5 parts. And another thing, and I didn't want to bore everybody, but the thing that interested me, and Coach, you'll probably get a kick out of this. Gunboat Smith. Now, for all you true boxing fans, you've heard of Gunboat Smith back in the same era that he's talking about. Was a tough journeyman type fighter, and he's got some footage of him sparring, which ought to be interesting.